The scent of roasted turkey and my mother-in-law's cloying perfume filled our Boston brownstone. It was the Thorne family's annual gathering, a tradition I'd endured for 20 years. My wife, Eleanor, laughed beside her cousin Julian, their hands brushing for a fraction too long. No one else noticed. But I, Robert Thorne, noticed everything. In my pocket, my thumb traced the cool plastic of the Slideshow remote. Tonight's presentation, a celebration of family, had a few special additions courtesy of a private investigator. They thought they were clever. They had no idea I ran Thorne Capital, a firm built on seeing patterns others missed. The projector hummed, casting a warm glow on their smiling, oblivious faces. I cleared my throat. Showtime. The first slide faded in, a sepia-toned photo of Eleanor's grandparents. A collective awe-w rippled through the room. Eleanor, my wife of 22 years, was the very picture of Bostonian aristocracy. Old money, perfect posture, and a smile that never quite reached her eyes. She squeezed Julian's arm, a gesture of shared nostalgia. "Oh, look, Jules," she whispered. "Grandmama's pearls." Julian leaned in, his own smile a practiced, charming lie. He was the family's golden boy, the artist who'd never sold a painting but lived handsomely off a trust fund I now knew my wife was supplementing. He caught my eye across the room, a flicker of something. Pity? Smugness? In his gaze. "A beautiful start, Robert," he said, his voice smooth as aged whiskey. They were a matched set. Polished on the surface, rotten underneath. At Thorne Capital, I deal with risk assessment daily. I evaluate assets, identify liabilities, and sitting there, nestled on my antique sofa, were my two greatest liabilities. The slideshow clicked forward to a photo of our wedding day. I let them soak in the memory, the lie of it all, the calm before the storm. The smiles in our wedding photo were genuine, once. Mine was the smile of a man who believed he'd secured his greatest asset. Hers was, well, I have a different perspective on that now. The suspicion didn't start with a whispered phone call or a lipstick-stained collar. It started, as most things do for me, with numbers. A discrepancy on our Amex statement. A recurring wire transfer to a gallery in Vermont that didn't exist. It wasn't a large sum. Not to us. A rounding error. But I built my fortune on spotting rounding errors that others ignored. The transfers were coded family support. When I asked Eleanor about them, she waved a dismissive hand, the diamonds on her wedding band flashing under the kitchen lights. "Oh, that's just for Julian's artist retreat, darling. You know how he struggles." "The retreat has been going on for 6 months, Eleanor." "That's not a retreat, it's a salary." Her eyes went cold. "It's my family's money, Robert. Don't be vulgar." She thought that was the end of it. She thought my concern was financial. She fundamentally misunderstood the man she'd married. I don't tolerate unaccounted-for variables in my portfolio, and I certainly don't tolerate them in my house. The next morning, I didn't call my lawyer. I called Marcus Vance, a man who specialized in discreet due diligence, the best private investigator in Boston. My instructions were simple. Follow the money, then follow my wife. Vance's first report arrived 3 weeks later in a plain manila envelope. No dramatic phone call, just a simple email notification. Package delivered. I opened it in my office, the city skyline behind me a blur of steel and glass. Inside was a USB drive. No text, just images. The first photo was of them at a cafe, holding hands across the table. Annoying, but explainable. The fifth was them kissing. A deep, passionate kiss. Outside a boutique hotel in the Berkshires. A hotel booked under Julian's name, paid for by Eleanor. A liability I could no longer ignore. But it was the 10th photo that turned my blood to ice. It was taken through a window. Them, intertwined on a bed, his face buried in her neck. The same pearls from her grandmother's portrait were pooled on the nightstand beside them. It wasn't just an affair. It was a grotesque perversion of the very family she claimed to be supporting. I looked at that photo for a full hour, not with rage, but with a chilling clarity. My wife and her cousin weren't a rounding error. They were a bad investment, and I was about to initiate a hostile takeover of their lives. I clicked the remote in my hand. The wedding photo faded, replaced by a picture of our son's first birthday. The audience cooed. Eleanor and Julian exchanged another look, one of shared history. They had no idea I was about to show them the rest of their history too. The photo of our son Leo blowing out a single candle gave way to another, a family vacation in Nantucket. Smiles, sunshine, striped umbrellas. I let two more such images drift by, each one a carefully placed foundation stone in the monument to our shared lie. Eleanor relaxed slightly, reaching for her wine glass. Julian chuckled at a picture of his younger self with a goofy haircut. They thought the danger had passed. They mistook my patience for forgiveness, an amateur miscalculation. And this, I announced, my voice steady, is from Eleanor's charity luncheon last spring. The slide changed. But it wasn't the luncheon. It was the cafe. Eleanor and Julian, hands clasped over a small table, her head tilted towards him, his eyes locked on hers. It was intimate. It was undeniable. A confused silence fell over the room. My mother-in-law, Beatrice, squinted. "What's this, Robert? I don't remember this outing." "Oh, goodness," I said, feigning surprise and fumbling with the remote. "My apologies. It seems a few of my research photos got mixed into the main folder." "Research?" Julian asked, his voice a little too tight. "For a new investment," I said, not looking at him, "in boutique hotels and loyalty." I let the word hang in the air. Eleanor shot me a look of pure venom. "Robert, for heaven's sake, fix it," she whispered, a hiss of controlled panic. "I'm trying, darling. This new remote is a bit tricky." I pressed the button again. The click was unnaturally loud in the silent room. The next image filled the screen. It was the hotel in the Berkshires. The kiss. Not a peck on the cheek, but a deep, searching kiss, Eleanor's hands clutching the lapels of Julian's jacket. The collective gasp was audible. Beatrice's wineglass slipped from her fingers, shattering on the hardwood floor. Eleanor's father, a man who hadn't raised his voice in 20 years, slowly got to his feet. "What is the meaning of this?" he demanded, his gaze fixed on the screen, then shifting to his daughter and nephew, who were now as pale as ghosts. Julian started to speak, a stammering denial forming on his lips. "It's not. We were just—" "Just what, Julian?" I asked, my voice dangerously soft. "Just supporting family? Is that the line item this falls under?" Eleanor stood abruptly, her face a mask of fury. "Turn it off, Robert! Turn it off right now!" "But the slideshow isn't over," I said, meeting her panicked gaze with a cold, placid smile. The remote was in my hand, my thumb resting on the next button. Everyone was frozen, staring at the illicit kiss projected 10 feet wide on my living room wall. They thought this was the worst of it. They thought this was the bottom. I watched the life they knew, the respect they commanded, the very foundation of their family, crack and splinter. At Thorne Capital, we call this a market correction. I call it justice. I gave them one last moment to absorb the wreckage before I liquidated the final asset. There's just one more picture I think everyone needs to see. My thumb didn't move from the button. The projector's fan was the only sound, a low whir against the backdrop of shattered silence. Eleanor took a step toward me, her hands clenched into fists, her society poise cracking like cheap veneer. "Don't you dare," she seethed, her voice a venomous whisper that carried across the room. Julian, ever the performer, tried to regain his footing. He stepped forward, placing a hand on Eleanor's arm, a parody of a protector. "Robert, this is insane. You're drunk." "Everyone, Robert has been under a lot of stress. I have never been clearer in my life, Julian. I cut him off, my voice level, almost conversational. I didn't raise it. I didn't need to. I held all the capital. My gaze went past them, to Eleanor's father, Arthur, whose face was a thunderous mask of confusion and betrayal. Her mother, Beatrice, was just staring at the screen, a hand over her mouth, her pearls seeming to tighten around her throat. Arthur, Beatrice. I apologize for the venue, I said, my voice cutting through the tension. But this is a family matter, and you all deserve to know the true nature of the assets you've been cherishing. Assets? Arthur bellowed, his voice finally cracking the silence. That is my daughter. What is this nonsense? It's a pattern of behavior, I replied, still calm, my eyes locked on his. A long-term liability hidden on the balance sheet under family support. I simply perform the due diligence that no one else would. Eleanor's composure finally shattered. He's trying to ruin me, she cried, playing to the crowd, her last desperate gambit. He found out about the money for Julian's studio and he's twisting it into this disgusting fantasy. A few cousins exchanged uncertain glances, wanting to believe her. Doubt is a powerful thing. But I had the data. A fantasy, I repeated softly. I looked from Eleanor's frantic face to Julian's pathetic attempt at indignation. Then I addressed the room again. I agree. It is disgusting. So much so that one might have trouble believing it without irrefutable proof. My thumb moved. A millimeter of pressure. I let them see the motion. Which brings me to my final slide. A look inside that artist retreat in Vermont. The one paid for with your money, Arthur. Let's see the great work being produced. The click of the remote was definitive. The image of the kiss began to fade. The click echoed, and the kiss vanished. For a fraction of a second, the screen was black, a void that sucked all the air from the room. Then, the new image resolved. It was the 10th photo. The one from inside the hotel room. It was artfully composed, in its own grotesque way, thanks to Marcus Vance's high-powered lens. Eleanor and Julian, tangled in white hotel sheets. The light from the window cast them in a soft, almost reverent glow. His face was buried in her neck, her head thrown back in a silent, ecstatic arch. And there, on the polished wood of the nightstand, coiled like a venomous snake, were her grandmother's pearls. There was no gasp this time. The sound was lower, more primal, a collective groan of absolute horror. Beatrice, my mother-in-law, made a choking sound and crumpled sideways in her chair, her husband too stunned to even catch her. Two of Eleanor's aunts simply stared, their faces slack with disbelief. Across the room, Leo, my son, home from college for the holiday, slowly stood up, his face ashen. He looked from the screen to his mother, his expression one of utter devastation. Eleanor didn't scream. She just stared at the image, at her own betrayal projected for the world to see. All the color drained from her face. Julian, the artist, the golden boy, looked like a cornered animal. He took a half step back, as if he could physically escape the light of the projector. The great work, I said into the dead silence. My voice was calm, measured, the voice I used for shareholder meetings when announcing mass layoffs. As you can see, the artist retreat was quite productive. Arthur, my father-in-law, finally found his voice. It wasn't a bellow of rage. It was a low, shaking growl. "Turn it off," he commanded, his eyes fixed not on me but on his daughter. I clicked the remote. The screen went blank, plunging the room into the soft ambient light of the Christmas tree. The obscene afterimage, however, was burned into every retina. In the sudden quiet, Beatrice began to sob, a series of ragged, broken breaths. You monster," Eleanor finally whispered, turning her gaze to me. Her eyes were wide with a mixture of hatred and terror. "You did this. You planned this." "I didn't plan your affair, Eleanor," I replied, taking a deliberate step forward. "I simply documented it. Think of it as an audit, an unscheduled but necessary review of a poorly performing asset." I stopped in the center of the room, the remote still in my hand, and my findings are conclusive. I turned to Arthur. For the past 2 years, funds from the Thorne Capital Family Trust, the trust I manage for all of you, have been diverted by Eleanor to Julian. Over $250,000, coded as family support. This is not just infidelity. This is theft. And this, I gestured to the blank screen, is what your family's legacy was funding. A wave of murmurs swept the room as cousins and uncles looked at each other, the financial betrayal landing with the same force as the moral one. Julian flinched as if struck. "It's my money!" Eleanor shrieked. "My inheritance!" "It was," I corrected her, my voice turning to ice. "Until you violated Section 4, subsection C of the trust agreement. The morality clause. A clause I added 6 years ago, which you all signed without reading the fine print. It prohibits any action that brings disrepute or public scandal upon the Thorne name. I'd say this qualifies." I let that sink in. I watched the gears turning in their heads as they realized the scope of my move. This wasn't just a husband's revenge. This was a hostile takeover. As of 9 a.m. this morning, I continued, my voice cutting through the rising panic. My legal team filed an emergency petition with the probate court. All of Eleanor's access to the trust has been frozen, pending a full investigation into fraud and misappropriation. The same goes for any beneficiary found to be complicit. I let my eyes drift over the shocked faces of the family, so I suggest you all think very carefully about whose side you were on. Julian started for the door. "Don't bother, Julian," I said without looking at him. "Your allowance has been permanently terminated. The locks on your Vermont love nest were changed this morning. Your belongings are in a storage unit in Brattleboro. The bill for the first month is in the mail." Finally, I turned back to my wife. She stood alone, abandoned, the family physically creating a space around her as if she were contagious. "This is my house, Eleanor. The one you are standing in was bought and paid for by me, not by your family's dwindling, ill-managed fortune. Your things are in the guest room. I've had Maria pack you a suitcase. A car is waiting outside to take you to your mother's. You have 10 minutes. She stared at me, her mouth opening and closing, but no sound came out. The fury was gone, replaced by the hollow shock of total defeat. She had miscalculated. She had assessed the risk and concluded I was a passionless man of numbers who would never make a scene. She failed to understand that to a man like me, a scene is just another tool, a market event to be triggered at the most opportune moment for the most devastating effect. I slipped the remote into my pocket and walked over to the bar to pour myself a whiskey. The family remained frozen, a tableau of ruin. The great house of Thorne, with its proud heritage and old money, had just been foreclosed on, and I was the one holding the deed. The ice in my whiskey glass clinked softly, a single, sharp sound in the cathedral of silence. I took a slow sip, the burn of the scotch a welcome anchor. No one moved. They were figures in a wax museum of my own making. Then, Arthur, Eleanor's father, took a shuffling step forward. He didn't look at me. His eyes, burning with a lifetime of disappointed patrician pride, were fixed on his daughter. "The pearls," he said, his voice a gravelly whisper of disgust. "You wore your grandmother's pearls." That one detail, so personal and profane, broke the spell. It was the final, unforgivable sin. He turned his head slowly, his gaze falling on Julian, who flinched as if he'd been slapped. "And you? We took you in. We gave you everything. And you repaid us like a snake in the cradle." Julian opened his mouth, but no sound came out. Arthur raised a shaking hand, not in anger, but in dismissal. "I have no nephew." He then turned back to Eleanor, his voice gaining a terrifying strength. "And I have no daughter. Get out of this house. Get out of my sight." This was the final verdict, not from me, but from him. Natural justice. Eleanor's face crumpled. The last bastion of her support had just been dynamited. Her eyes darted around the room, searching for an ally, a friendly face, and finding only stone. They landed on our son, Leo. "Leo," she pleaded, her voice cracking, taking a step toward him. "My son, please, you have to listen to me. Your father, he's a manipulative monster. He's twisting this." Leo, who had remained frozen near the fireplace, finally moved. He looked at the blank screen where the photo had been, then at her. The devastation in his eyes was a physical thing, a wound. "I saw the picture, Mom," he said, his voice hollow. "I saw your face. Was that a lie, too?" He didn't wait for an answer. He turned his back on her, a simple, brutal gesture that severed the final cord. That was it. The total liquidation. Eleanor seemed to shrink, the life draining out of her. Without a word, she turned and walked towards the foyer. Her movements were stiff, robotic. Julian, after a moment of panicked hesitation, scurried after her, a disgraced court jester following his deposed queen into exile. No one spoke. No one offered a coat. The family simply parted, creating a silent corridor for their shame. The heavy front door opened, let in a blast of cold December air, and then clicked shut behind them, the sound as final as a gavel strike. The tension in the room didn't dissipate, it just changed shape. Now, all eyes were on me. Fear had replaced shock. I set my whiskey glass down on the bar with a definitive click. "Well," I said, surveying the room. That was unpleasant. My voice was devoid of emotion. I was a CEO addressing the board after a necessary but bloody restructuring. But the rot has been excised. Now, we move forward. I walked back to the center of the room. "Beatrice, Arthur, my home is your home, as always. As for the rest of you," my gaze swept across the cousins and aunts. "The Thorne Capital Family Trust is now under strict review. The quarterly disbursements will be suspended pending a full audit of all personal and professional accounts associated with it." A fresh wave of quiet panic rippled through the room. Their lifestyles, their children's tuition, their club memberships, all of it ran through that trust. All of it now ran through me. "I'm sure it's just a formality," I added, offering a thin smile that didn't reach my eyes. "A simple matter of ensuring there are no other, unaccounted-for liabilities. We'll rebuild. We'll be stronger. A leaner, more profitable enterprise." I left them to ponder their new corporate structure and walked over to my son. Leo still had his back to the room, staring into the fire. I placed a hand on his shoulder. He didn't flinch. We stood there for a long moment, watching the flames consume the wood. He had lost his mother tonight. I had lost a bad investment. The market had corrected. The portfolio was clean. The numbers, finally, added up. The fire crackled, consuming the silence. Leo finally spoke, his voice raspy, never taking his eyes off the flames. Was it worth it? Destroying everything just to win? I kept my hand on his shoulder, a gesture that was meant to be comforting but felt more like a claim of ownership. "Winning wasn't the objective, Leo," I said, my voice low and firm. "Survival was. A cancer was growing in this family. I performed the surgery. It was brutal, yes, but it was necessary to save the rest of the body." I wasn't just talking about his mother. I was talking about the weakness, the lies, the financial rot she represented. He shook my hand off, a small, violent gesture of rejection. He looked at me then, and for the first time I saw not just pain in his eyes, but a chilling assessment. He was seeing me for what I was. Without another word, he turned and walked out of the room, his footsteps echoing up the grand staircase. He had made his choice. Another asset reclassified. His departure broke the spell. Arthur, his face a decade older than it was an hour ago, approached me. He didn't offer a hand, he simply nodded, a formal, defeated gesture. "The trust," he said, his voice heavy. "You'll manage it fairly?" "I manage all my investments for maximum return," I replied, meeting his watery gaze. "The family is my primary investment now." It was both a promise and a threat. One by one they collected their coats in a funereal quiet. Husbands avoided their wives' eyes. Aunts clutched their purses like shields. There were no goodbyes, no holiday wishes, just the quiet shuffle of feet as they abandoned the shipwreck, leaving their disgraced matriarch, Beatrice, sobbing on the antique sofa. Arthur eventually helped his wife to her feet, and they were the last to go. The closing of the front door echoed in the cavernous silence. The house was finally quiet, cleansed. I walked through the living room, picking up Beatrice's shattered wine glass. On the mantelpiece was a silver-framed photo of Eleanor, Leo, and me, taken years ago. A perfect portfolio. I picked it up, studied Eleanor's face. The beautiful, fraudulent asset. With a calm, deliberate motion, I removed the photo, tore her half away, and let the pieces flutter into the fire. The ledger was balanced. The victory, absolute. So here's the big question for you all. Was I justified in exposing them in front of the whole family, or did I go too far with the slideshow revenge?